Welcome to our webinar this evening on the topic of affirmations. The topic this week is patience, something that all of us want in ample quantity in our everyday lives. One of my teachers said, the difference between having patience and not having it is very small. When you have patience, you make many friends. And when you don't have patience, you create enemies. That's quite a big difference in life. All the forces of life tend to turn against us when we are in a mode of impatience. Swami Kriyananda defined patience as being able to live in the longer rhythms of life. We live in a world of instant gratification. Everything is online. We are bombarded with messages and information from every quarter of life. And it's not just happening to us, it's happening to everybody else around us. So if we take the simple example of our homes, we find children who are overstimulated because of the kind of television programs they watch, the kind of information they get from various media, the kind of food they eat. So they are totally sugared and wired to be overstimulated. When it comes to our spouses, they go through the stresses and strains of life, and when they come home, they want to be themselves. And when everybody wants to be themselves and let their guard down, boy, there's a lot of room for patience there in the family. A friend of mine shared the story of how she was getting into a repeated pattern when her husband made a small mistake. After dinner, he would forget to put some water in the dish, and in the sink next morning would be a dry dish, and that's it. That was her hot button. And she would start the day on a furious note, and then everybody at home was upset, and there was a lot of room for patience in there. I would like to at this point of time read for you from the book Affirmations for Self-Healing. This is on page 43. Patience, it has been well said, is the shortest path to God. To attune the heart to the rhythms of eternity, one must first adjust himself to life's longer rhythms. He should not allow his mind to become absorbed in concentration on the little ripples at the surface of the sea. Patience means also adjusting to whatever is in life rather than wishing it were something else. Patience is a prerequisite for every type of success. For it is when we work with things as they are that we can change them to whatever we might like them to be. There was a story that Swamiji often shared in many of his talks. He spoke about a man who was very well-to-do in life, a very successful businessman. And then the circumstances in his life changed completely, and he literally lost everything that he owned. And from riches, he was down to rags. There were debtors chasing him to recover money from him. And the only solution he could think of at that point of time was to end his life. So he went to a cabin by the beach side and was spending the last day of his life there, thinking about how unfair life had been to him. And that further strengthened his resolve to end his life. Next day morning, he walked into the deep ocean, hoping to be able to end his life there. The waves lashed at him, and he fought the waves, and each time he was thrown to the shore. When this happened to him a few times, he obviously was very weary and injured. He saw a little seashell by the seaside, and how softly and peacefully it rested there. And in that moment, the realization came to him of what was the difference between that fragile little seashell which coped with the ocean waves in a much better way. All that the seashell did was to go along the flow of the waves rather than to fight them. And he realized all his life what he had been doing was trying to fight whatever happened to him. This is a very common trap to each one of us in our everyday lives. We find it difficult to accept things the way they are, and we try to make up for those differences from our expectations by coping, by at times overcompensating, by at times trying to do things so that it would look more perfect, more the way we want it to be. We forget who's in charge of this world, and we try to create our own rhythms, which are far higher frequency than the way life's rhythms should be. I remember a time 4 years ago when we moved from Delhi into Pune. Pune was a new city to us, and at work, because it was a new company we were setting up, I had a lot of colleagues who were from different cities and all new to Pune. So my boss had moved from Russia, and he was a German by upbringing, and I had another colleague who had moved from Bangalore. And almost every day when we started out, we would start by cribbing about how things took much longer in Pune. Everybody around us worked slower, people would just not turn up, whether it was the carpenter or whether it was the person who made office supplies or people who had to come for meetings to sign up contracts. Nobody ever came on time. And what made it worse was the entire city of Pune had a long break in the afternoon when shops would close for an afternoon siesta. The first year was spent grumbling, but slowly when you get used to the environment around you, you start to enjoy that rhythm. It's okay. You realize to take life a little slower in this fast-paced world. And before you realize, you get used to that rhythm and become more accepting, and you work around it. I started to plan a little more in advance, and I was able to get things done a lot more joyfully. So in work situations, it happens very often that our patience is tested, and it's not very easy when somebody misses the deadline and you're on the firing line for a mistake you didn't make. But what can we do about the situation? Obviously, at one level it is to be more planful. The other is to be able to take into account everybody else's reality and see that how as a team we need to work around this so that we can make things pleasant for people around us. When there is a mood of joy and happiness, things start to flow. And when we are in the flow, then we meet more than deadlines. We are in a state of inspiration, we are in a situation where we are able to find solutions, and we are able to very quickly move the needle from a problem consciousness to a solution consciousness. And that is what we need in the workplace, being in the flow and finding peace with ourselves, being more accepting of ourselves. So it all begins with ourselves. A lot of times we get so frustrated and worked up with the way we are. We're just not able to find the energy to do something at a given point of time, and then we are unpardoning with ourselves. There are a number of techniques that Paramahansa Yogananda taught us on how to find more energy in our lives. The energization exercises is a simple way to start, and then of course he talks about looking at having more energy in everything that we do by the sheer lifestyle that we have. A big component is the mind. We tend to feed our minds of a lot of negative emotions, a lot of times very unconsciously. It could be the newspapers, it could be the media, it could be the kind of company that we keep. There is a lot of negativity, fear, worry, and a magnetism of failure that tends to set in when all the other negative emotions come in. We need to be watchful and protective of ourselves from these negative emotions. One easy technique is to substitute these negative emotions with positive affirmations. And positive affirmations work at different levels. They work at the subconscious mind, where a lot of these problems and habits have their roots. It can be taken up to the conscious level, where we operate on a day-to-day basis. And more importantly, through our meditations, we are able to take our affirmations into the superconscious, and that is when they become a part of us. And in this case, we become more patient. We are patient, and when we are patient, we are able to cope with things a lot more than we would be in a state of anger or frustration, which is what it looks like when we don't have patience. The application of patience in our spiritual life is one most important dimension. As we read today, patience is the most important quality on the spiritual path, because it takes a lot of patience for us to find God. Like we read in the prayer today, for eons of time, God has been patient with our fickleness. In each lifetime after lifetime, we have chased different dreams, which has taken us far away from God. And if He can be so patient with us, then the question on the spiritual path boils down to, why can't we be patient? We experience periods of dryness in our meditation. We go through the attractions of Maya, and all of these become obstacles to us on the path. And we reach those points very easily and very quickly when we are ready to give up. But like we learned in Raja Yoga, it is contentment and happiness and patience which are some of the most important qualities and kind of different dimensions of patience which we need to hold on to just to stay on the course. And if we are able to do that in this lifetime, then spiritual success will definitely be ours. And on that note, I would like to conclude for today. Thank you for being with us. Om.